across the globe. And next we have Ms. Senator LOREN LEGARDA. She's at the UNISDR Global Champion for Resilience and UNFCCC, which is the National Adaptation Plan Champion. She also works as the chairperson of the Philippines Senate Committees on Finance, Foreign Relations, and Climate Change. Thank you so much for being here today. We would like by starting off asking what are the main challenges that you face in promoting women's empowerment in your region and in the general work that you do, and what have been policies or steps that you've taken to actually empower our empowerment?
Well, first of all, good morning to all, and I'm glad that we have this gender forum, gender chat today in the midst of all the spring meetings. Are we on? Thank you. I know that we are online in many platforms, including my office in Manila, in the Philippine Senate, and in the Philippine Embassy here, in our IMF office. So I thank all of you for being here this morning. First, as you know, I'm a legislator. I'm one of 24 senators, and I chair the committees on finance, foreign relations, and climate change. But in my 3 terms, having been in the Senate for 20 years, I've legislated very important laws protecting the interests of women and children. But before that, I would like to state that we're proud that the Philippines is #1 in closing the gender gap, #1 in Asia, and #7 in the world. We've been acknowledged in Brussels many years ago, and continuously, because we've retained the #1 status. First, on account of policies and legislation that we've crafted, and second, because of our strides through the executive department, through the police, through the work of very creative and vigilant non-government organizations to protect the interests of our women. But still, there are many hurdles and challenges, considering that we come from a developing nation of 100 million people. What are the laws that I have crafted in my 3 6-year terms in the Senate? First, the Anti-Trafficking in Persons Act, which is self-explanatory, which combats the sale, the abuse, the trafficking of women and children. I authored that in my first term, but it was largely ineffective. And so in 2012, we decided to amend the law to have harsher provisions for violators of trafficking of women. Second, we also have the Magna Carta of Women, which sets the framework or the policies for the protection of the rights of women. We also have the Anti-Domestic Violence Act, because as we know, not just in the Philippines, but everywhere in the world, sometimes women suffer in the hands of those they are with in their homes, in their workplace, domestically, by people who love them most or who they love most. And so this is a law that has empowered many women who before then did not have the facility or the law to protect their interests in their homes. There are also laws that impact on women. And one was discussed, actually, an issue that was discussed in the financial inclusion high-level session last night. And that's the issue of MSMEs, or micro and small and medium enterprises, because many of the rural industries and many of the MSMEs in my country, which is the backbone of the Philippine economy, of more than 99%, are run by women. Women who head cooperatives, women who are part of rural associations, women who are farmers and fisher folks, women who have micro-enterprises, whether they are weavers, they are artisans, who do beautiful things. And so the MSME law, which is implemented by the Department of Trade, which I fund as chairman of the Committee on Finance, is also so important. So the issue of financial inclusion, of making technology accessible to them, so easier, faster access to credit, to finance, is made available to these women. So as you can see, from the protection of women domestically in their homes, to the protection of women and children who sometimes are being exported, in quotation marks, from the provinces to the cities, and from the cities abroad, to the protection of women in terms of rural livelihoods. We've covered it all by legislation. Now the question is, what are the challenges? The challenges is not just to finance, because I've seen to it that I not only draft and pass the law, but I also fund it as chairman of the Committee on Finance for the past 3 years. But the challenge really is having people acknowledge these problems, aware of the laws, and respecting the rights of these women. And the bigger challenge is that other countries in other jurisdictions may not have equally strong legislation to protect women. Because it is unfortunate that despite the fact that we are #1 in Asia in closing the gender gap, the Philippines is also #1 in terms of the source of trafficked children and women, the source of cyber pornography. And that is a terrible thing to accept, but it's a reality. Only because the syndicates who prevail or who are based abroad. And sometimes the legislation in those countries, in different continents of the world, are not as strong as Philippine legislation. And so that's the issue I would like to bring to the floor today, that there must be greater engagement and cooperation. And I always ask parliaments of the world to have laws as stringent, as strong as we have, so that all women of the world, not just from the Philippines, are protected from being trafficked, from being harassed, and from being abused. I don't know how much time I have. I know we have our other participants and panelists, and I may speak more later if given the opportunity. Thank you.
Hello everyone. Thank you for coming. So yeah, as I was introduced, I'm Shanti. I'm from Nepal, but I'm based in Malaysia, and I work with an organization called International Women's Rights Action Watch Asia Pacific. We are based in Malaysia, but our work is quite global. So what we do is we engage with international NGOs, mainly women's rights organizations in different countries, working with them, mobilizing, building their capacities, so that they can influence agendas, policies related to women's rights at the international level. And whatever the international commitments we have on women's rights, bringing it back to the national context. So that's how we work. So for the question regarding the challenges that we face, I would like to be very specific and go directly to the challenges. So I see them as like in 3 different categories. One is political challenges, another economic, and the third one is social. I will explain. The biggest challenge we as women's rights organization are facing today is no one is ready to accept that women, and particularly no one is ready to talk about human rights. So human rights is seen as something foreign, and then that is not related to women's realities on the ground. And the space, we have been talking about this for last few days, like the space for civic engagement is kind of shrinking and closing. And that is creating lots of challenges for NGOs to organize and work. So they're happening, and it is not happening in a natural way, but it is like there is very conscious kind of effort of doing that. Many countries even formulating legislations and policies to create barrier or to stop NGOs from doing their advocacy. So that has been a real challenge for almost many NGOs, not just women's rights, but that is impacting women more. Another thing, we are patriarchy. I would just like to bring about patriarchy. I mean, it was there forever, and very little has been changed. And on top of that, we have all these like in the shrinking spaces, political spaces, and we are also facing challenges related to economic issues. We see, like women's participation will promote productivity, will bring economic growth. But are we investing on women? Because if you are talking about productivity, you'll also have to think about protection. Are we providing them enough protection, social security, so that they can be productive and they can contribute to the economy? If you do not link productivity to the protection, then it becomes exploitation, and that is what is happening in many countries. Just to give you an example of women, they are overrepresented in informal sectors, in like very precarious forms of employment, in garment sector, in domestic work. But there is no strong framework at the national level to protect their rights. And another thing that is adding complexity to this challenge is the way the private sector and government, that lack of coordination and lack of accountability mechanism for private companies to be, very straightforward. Like multinational companies operating somewhere, going somewhere, and then in their countries where they are, they are based, the situation of women is kind of relatively good, mostly in the global north, but in global south, there are many violations. Just to take an example of the Rana Plaza incident that happened in Bangladesh, where 1,000 garment workers died and 80% of them were women. So still they have not, they are still in the process and fighting for the justice. So that is one. So these are various things like political challenges there and funding. I mean, we all are working and we have to struggle to find funds. I mean, there are very few donors ready to invest in women. And just to give you an example, that there was this Women Peacemakers program, which was there for 20 years. And now, at the time when there are so many issues related to peace, security, and conflict increasing, but that fund was closed, that program was closed last year. So it is very telling on what is our priority, and so that is another challenge. So funding, economic climate is not very favorable for women if we talk about women's rights to work and empowerment, and the cultural and social barriers, and the politically the space is shrinking and becoming very hard for activists to talk about human rights, women's rights, and feminism.
Thank you so much. Given that you have mentioned that Philippines is #1 in Southeast Asia, at least closing the gender gap, and you and Shanti, you have said that it's more of a patriarchal system, and there's a lot of other issues that also play into it. Do you think that most of these issues are regional specific, or do you think that gender gap is, the issues are the same across the globe?
Well, I think that women's issues are reflected regardless of religious belief or culture or geographical jurisdiction. However, based on the society in which the women thrive, there can be various challenges. But I think, as I said, we have overcome much of those challenges through the years, having elected women in the Senate, in the lower house of Congress as heads of state. We've had 2 women presidents and women CEOs, but of 100 million population, while a small percentage are women leaders in the banking sector, etc. But we still see a lot of women who need to be empowered through access to education, access to reproductive health care, access to microfinance in the rural areas, access to the means to be able to have sustainable livelihoods. And so for me, that is a greater challenge in a developing nation. And I believe that much of that can be overcome if they are given the resources, the means to have access to credit. When women have access to credit and they have the means, their own purse, and they don't have to rely on their families, their husbands, on the heads of the families, for their own livelihood. They'll feel more confident, they can take care of themselves and their children, of their health care, and we can have a more robust rural economy if we support micro-enterprises run and with women members. For me, spurring development in the rural areas through grassroots initiatives and spurring the rural economy is one of the greater challenges in my country. As I go around the 7,100 islands and the 80 provinces in 1,634 local governments, I see women leaders who are mayors, governors, board members, locally elected, nationally elected. I've been there for 20 years. However, I've also seen so many women, our indigenous peoples, more than 10 million of them, who are just there nursing their children, and all they want is to have a few thousands of pesos or a loom to be able to further their craft, to be able to market their goods. I see women who've never left the island provinces, far-flung areas, where there could be some local political tension, and I try to bring them to Manila to be able to expose them to the National Museum's indigenous people's capacity building cultural programs to see the beautiful weaves, etc. And it's the first time they've come to the city. So there is such a contrast between empowered Filipino women and those who actually need so much help. And I believe this is not unique to the Philippines. This, I'm sure, is happening in Nepal, in Malaysia, in many other places, not just in Southeast Asia, but in the world. And so the economic aspect is one very important concern that could help empower women. And the Philippines, being one of the top 3 vulnerable nations in the world to the impacts of natural hazards or climate change, impacts on women as well. Women are the first to be affected. They gather water, firewood, they gather their children, their things when a storm is oncoming. And so climate action is needed based in the rural areas to help women so that women are able to do climate adaptation initiatives, and that needs empowerment. That needs resources. That needs economic resources to do. So I believe that there's a lot of challenges to be done, but the way forward really is giving economic empowerment to our women. Policies are in place. It's just a matter of reaching out. It's not easy for a country where I belong because we're an archipelago of 1,700 islands. But gains have been made. The fact that we have closed the gender gap in terms of the political sphere, but in the economic sphere, in health, in education, there are a lot of challenges to be met.
I think, yes, many challenges are very specific to different countries and based on their national realities. Some countries have challenges related to disasters. Some countries are still fighting around religion. And women are trapped into those challenges. But there also is this very global trend, and they are common to many countries. And that the kind of global trend, just taking an example of different countries legislating things to curtail women's rights, and that is happening in many countries around the world. Just the global gap is also an example of how women's abortion rights and sexual and reproductive health rights have now become a very political issue. And many countries are getting influenced by these kind of very regressive ideas and measures taken by other governments. So this kind of, there are many things common with different countries, but specific challenges are also there.
Thank you so much for your time here. I wanted to open the floor for questions, given that it's an informal chat. If anyone does have any questions, please bring it forward. There's a mic.
Thank you very much. I am from an Italian NGO. His name is Knowledge and Innovation. And among many other things, this NGO promotes gender equality plan for empowering the position of women in business, in politics, and in science. My question is, I have a question. Taking into account that we have noticed that women can play a very, very important role when they are the leaders in scientific organization, in universities and similar organizations. Do you have the intention to promote also some laws for help the empowerment of women also in the scientific field? Perhaps it's a complementary field, but my impression on the basis of my experience is that it is not so less important field.
Was this question addressed to someone specific?
If I may repeat your question briefly, are there opportunities to help women in the scientific field? Sir, is that your question? To improve their status, women in science, women in the scientific field, what is it in our country that we have done for them to reach higher status in the scientific field? Is that your question? Yes. Well, there are programs under our Commission on Higher Education that provides scholarships, because we have a new law that gives free college education in all state universities and colleges, and a portion of the budget is dedicated specifically for those in the medical field. But there's also a large chunk of the budget dedicated for those in science, maybe not necessarily just for women, but women could access that as well. That's government funding under the national budget for science. But if there are, I'm certain that there could be those in the private sector. Just yesterday, I had a meeting with a former U.S. ambassador to the Philippines who mentioned about a Philippine foundation that the U.S.-Philippine Society is also supporting on sending not just women, but Filipinos to Silicon Valley for technology studies, technology exchange, etc. But it's not just dedicated to women. But it would be interesting to know your question and for me to develop a program based on your intervention with a state university where I'm from, where our banking expert to the IMF is from. And perhaps you could help me develop a program for women in science, which I could fund under the engineering or statistics field where she's from. You know, we have a bright person from the Philippine banking institution here in the IMF. So now she has an assignment to give me a program for women in science, not just statistics or the medical field, probably engineering, probably biotechnology, whichever, which I could fund under the University of the Philippines system. So thank you for that. It's a new idea. And I can assure you something will come out of it. Okay, thanks.
I think we have room for only one last question.
Maybe one more question, and then perhaps they can stay and may go for coffee afterwards. And we're also going to have our gender display over here. We have more coffee over there. We have our gender portals where we're talking to women from around the world. So please, after this, come and join us over there. Continue the conversation. Take one more question.
Hi, I'm Nina Matthews. Thank you so much for such an insightful discussion. So of course you spoke about the role that NGOs and the state have had, and they've been largely effective. But of course, when international organizations such as the UN have implemented measures to influence women, such as the Convention of Elimination of the Discrimination Against Women Act, they've proved largely ineffective, and there have been large gaps. What do you see is the role of these international organizations in alleviating human rights violations and women's empowerment.
Particularly speaking about UN, because there is this CEDAW Convention, which is the International Women's Rights Convention, and the second most ratified treaty by the countries. So the strength, just to talk about that, the strength of that particular instrument is that it is legally binding document, and when the country ratifies it, they have the legal obligation to fulfill the commitment domestically by legislating and by taking measures, implementing those commitments. So that is the very focus area of our work, and I think the challenge here is because we are coming up. That is one part. There are like UN treaty body mechanisms, maybe legally binding human rights standards, are guiding different countries to kind of work in terms of deciding what could be their policies, what your policy should look like when it is like domestic violence or when it's employment rights. So the guidance is there, the commitment is there, but the implementation is not happening properly. And also to talk about like SDGs. So we have we spent there was MDGs and we failed MDGs when there was the time to evaluate the result. And now we have SDGs for next 15 years. The challenge here is we have not been able to link, because SDGs is the development framework and there are like human rights frameworks. So if we miss to link the different existing international commitments or international frameworks, then we will miss and it will be hard for us to achieve those 17 goals that we are aiming to achieve by at the end of after 50 years. That is what we are advocating for, that there should be the connection yes.
Yes. I'd like to add to that, thank you. The CEDAW has been the basis, the Convention Against the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women has been the basis of a Magna Carta for Women, which I helped co-author in the Senate, and it's now a law. As you know, the CEDAW is a basis for all social, economic, and political rights of women. It was also the basis for the GAD law, the Gender in Development law in the Philippines, which mandates the inclusion of a 5% allocation for women in every governmental agency's budget. So the conventions are very, very important because that's international law. And the role of international organizations is also important. So I think that helps answer your question. Our commitment to international treaties and conventions are legislated by member countries, and the challenge now is to operationalize it on the ground.
Thank you so much, everyone, for actually coming here, and thank you so much, panelists, Shanti and Sarita, for being here and talking about women's empowerment. Hopefully you can stay, and if you do,
okay, we're moving.
They would be happy.
We're moving to the next meeting.
Thank you, everybody, and again, join us over at